Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're demystifying a 50-year history, specifically how two radically different cultures, Wall Street and Silicon Valley, converged to literally build our modern global economy. It's this incredible story of parallel civilizations waking up and realizing, hey, we kind of need each other to conquer the future.
Okay, let's look at our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting two empires in the making, the infrastructure of money, the architecture of alliance, crises in the new order, and finally, three competing theses of power.
So, Part 1, Two Empires in the Making, from 1950 to 1975.
Picture our starting point back in 1971. You've got these two totally isolated rooms on opposite coasts. Out west in Menlo Park, engineers are hunched over assembling blueprints for the personal computer. Meanwhile, back east in New York, economists are sweating over the massive fallout of the U.S. unpegging the dollar from gold. They're speaking completely different languages, totally unaware they're on a collision course that's going to rewrite American power.
And you know what's wild? This whole institutional concept of venture capital barely even existed back then. That is, until a 29-year-old analyst named Arthur Rock just sort of improvised it to fund Fairchild Semiconductor. There was absolutely no playbook for this. By deploying speculative risk capital into unproven tech in exchange for equity, he built the very first bridge between Eastern money and Western tech. He proved this crazy new model could actually work.
Moving right along to Part 2, the infrastructure of money, covering 1971 to 1985. So shifting to a floating fiat currency after the 1971 Nixon shock wasn't just a policy tweak. It required massive new financial instruments and some seriously heavy computational support to manage. This intense need for speed and data processing directly birthed the electronic, floorless NASDAQ exchange that exact same year. Literally, overnight, Wall Street realized they needed tech.
Now, while Wall Street was frantically computerizing its markets to handle this new fiat reality, Silicon Valley was quietly laying the foundations of a completely networked world. We're talking ARPANET in '69, TCP/IP in '74, and the founding of Microsoft and Apple right after. And this massive burst of innovation, it was fueled almost entirely by private West Coast investors flying completely under New York's radar.
But while that isolation came to a screeching halt in December 1980, Apple Computer goes public and raises over $100 million. Let that sink in. At the time, that was a staggering amount of money. It proved to Wall Street once and for all that technology wasn't just some cute hobbyist niche anymore. It was a bona fide, massive new category of economic power.
Which brings us to Part 3. The architecture of alliance, from 1985 to 2000.
In the 80s, we see several massive shifts colliding all at once. The dismantling of New Deal financial regulations, like eliminating interest ceilings, synced up perfectly with the booming PC revolution. East Coast banks started hiring these brilliant math and physics minds, the first quants, to build algorithmic trading models. And the kicker? Capital from massive East Coast pension funds finally flooded into West Coast risk funds. The marriage was officially institutionalized.
You can actually see the physical merger of these two worlds in the Bloomberg terminal. Hitting desks around 1986, this was a pure technology product sold directly to finance guys, feeding them real-time news, data, and analytics. It was kind of a Trojan horse, right? It slowly began turning the financial sector into a technology sector itself.
Fast forward to 1995, and Wall Street has basically tossed traditional valuations out the window when it comes to tech. Look at this number, almost $3 billion. That was the opening day valuation for Netscape, a 16-month-old company that wasn't even turning a profit. They traded traditional price-to-earnings ratios for brand new metrics like eyeballs and page views, officially kicking off the absolute frenzy of the dot-com era.
Now for the stress test. Part 4, Crises and the New Order. 2000 to 2010. $5 trillion. That's the mind-boggling amount of dot-com wealth that just vanished into thin air by 2002. It was an absolute bloodbath, and yet, the alliance survived. The companies that made it through, like Amazon and Google, essentially used the wreckage and super cheap assets to quietly build out the modern cloud and ad infrastructure that completely runs our lives today.
Then we hit 2008. Now, people call the 2008 collapse a banking failure, but it was fundamentally a technological crisis. At the center was this complex algorithmic formula known as the Gaussian copula function. Basically, it created this extremely dangerous illusion that unpredictable risk could be perfectly quantified. It fueled algorithmic constructs that ended up spreading financial contagion through computerized trading networks at literally the speed of light.
So, to stop the bleeding post-2008, the government stepped in and drove interest rates down to near zero. Suddenly, there's all this incredibly cheap capital sloshing around. At the exact same time, Apple drops the iPhone and opens the App Store, birthing the mobile internet. What happens? Wall Street takes that cheap, near-zero money and gorges on funding a highly scalable, high-margin digital advertising machine. Welcome to the attention economy.
This brings us to our final section, Part 5, 3 Competing Theses of Power, where we interpret what this alliance actually means today.
So how do we make sense of all this? Well, the first interpretation is the democratic innovation thesis. This argues that the alliance between code and capital is the ultimate engine for human progress. The idea here is that it's the most efficient mechanism ever devised for allocating capital to productive innovation. By giving massive public liquidity to risky, brilliant ideas born in dorm rooms and garages, it extended human capability way beyond what any central planner could pull off.
But then, you have to look at the data from the other side. The extraction thesis points directly at these wildly divergent growth lines. We're talking 1,322% growth in CEO compensation versus just 18% for workers since 1978. From this perspective, the alliance essentially used low interest rates to construct monopoly platforms, acting less like an innovation engine and more like a massive machine for transferring wealth from labor straight to capital.
Finally, we have the geopolitical thesis. This third lens views the whole thing as a grand story of American power. The argument is that dominant tech platforms, combined with dollar supremacy flowing through global financial networks, have essentially built an operating system for the entire world. It's about maintaining a tight, intertwined grip on the 21st century global order.
So we've traced this incredible history. We watched two isolated empires, tech and finance, merge into this single, unstoppable ecosystem. And we're left with these 3 competing realities of what they actually built. Is it an engine for democratic innovation, a mechanism for rent extraction, or a sprawling geopolitical superpower? As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a lingering question to chew on. If all 3 of these theses hold some truth, who ultimately gets to decide which side of the ledger matters more? Is this a triumph of human ingenuity, or just a massive concentration of power? It's definitely something to keep in mind the next time you scroll through your smartphone or check your investment portfolio. Thanks for hanging out with me on this deep dive into code and capital.